In Douglas E. Arch's book, The Life of a Screw, which looks at his 10-year career as a corrections officer in New Brunswick, which also talks about his time serving at the old Woodstock, New Brunswick jail, he talks about aspects of the Benny Swim legend murder case and Swim's execution at the gallows in Woodstock. The Benny Swim case is one of the most notorious in not only Canadian history, but in world history. It details the 1922 case of the murder of Olive and Harvey Trenholm. In an essay published on the University of New Brunswick website by Dr. Michael Boudreau of St. Thomas University, a noted investigator in cases such as the Swim case. On March 27, 1922, 20-year-old Benny Swim murdered Olive Swim Trenholm, his cousin and former sweetheart, and her husband, Harvey Trenholm. The murders were committed at Benton Ridge, a small community 25 kilometers from Woodstock in Carleton County, New Brunswick. Harvey Trenholm was a veteran of the First World War, and he of Olive Swim had only been married for less than 2 weeks before he had been sent into eternity with tragic suddenness. Now, the question of Swim's guilt was not necessarily in question, since he confessed soon after to the brutal murders. As if Swim had allegedly said upon his arrest, quoted in the local press, "It's awful what a woman will bring a man down to. I will hang for this." During Swim's trial, the prosecution cast the murder of Olive and Harvey Trenholm as premeditated and Benny Swim as a cold-blooded murderer. Swim had grown quite fond of Olive while he'd been living with Olive and her father. According to Olive's father, she and Benny had essentially lived as man and wife for over a year. But while Benny had hoped to formalize this conjugal arrangement through marriage, and he had even given Olive a wedding ring, she spurred his offer of matrimony and instead became betrothed to Harvey Trenholm. When Benny learned of their marriage, he traveled to her home in an effort to convince Olive to leave Harvey. Prior to departing, however, Benny purchased a 5-shooter revolver. When he arrived at Harvey and Olive's home, Swim shot Harvey following a brief confrontation, and when Olive heard the gun shot, she came to the front door. Benny eventually begged her to come with him, but when she refused, Swim shot her in the breast. Olive then staggered back in the house. Swim followed and shot her a second time, this time through the heart. One newspaper report at the time attributed the murder to pure jealousy and claimed that Benny Swim had said, "I'm willing to die for this girl. It was all over 10 minutes after my arrival at the house." After Swim had shot Harvey and Olive Trenholm, he fled and hid in the surrounding woods, where he tried to commit suicide, but by shooting himself in the head. Now, even though his previous use of the gun ended 2 lives, he could not succeed in his attempt to end his own, as the bullet that he put in the gun towards his head lodged in his right temple and eventually was later removed. The police were able to capture Swim by following the trail of blood that had formed from this wound. According to investigators and researchers over the decades, to many, Swim was a typical murderer for his category. In a study of 444 capital cases between 1926 and 1957, Kenneth L. Avio compiled a list of statistically representative characteristics of those individuals who had been condemned to die. The representative offender was male, 33 years of age, Anglo-Canadian, and held a low-status occupation while having no dependents. Swim generally fit this profile, including the fact that prior to killing Harvey and Olive, Swim worked for a local company peeling pulp. His trial lasted 3 days in April of 1922, and the jury took less than an hour to find Benny Swim guilty of the willful murder of Olive Trenholm. The jury did not, however, recommend to the court that mercy be shown to Benny Swim. Thus he was sentenced by the presiding judge to be hanged by the neck until dead. Chief Justice McCowan told Swim that in the time he had left on this earth, he should call in the service of the clergyman of your faith and throw yourself unreservedly in his hands in order that you may, to some degree, prepare for the ordeal which awaits you and for the passage to that higher tribunal before which of all must ultimately stand. Now, the Swim murder case was an intense impact on the community, but when his execution was to many botched, he rode into legend, and the legend of the Benny Swim ghost has built from this incident. To many, the execution of Benny Swim ended up being a terrible affair and also horrendous. He was executed on 6th of October 1922, not once, but technically twice. One local newspaper set the stage for this grim event, while Swim's parents visited him in his jail cell to say their last goodbyes. There could be heard in the yard below the screeching sound of saws and the ringing of steel against steel as workmen busied themselves with building the scaffold that would swing their son into eternity. After a last meal of grapefruit and a few sips of tea, Swim walked to his doom, leaning on the arm of the executioner, and mounted the gallows steps with bowed head and tottering footsteps. Swim's alleged final words before the hangman placed a black cap over his head were a plea to God to have mercy on his soul. At 6 minutes past 5 a.m., the trapdoor was sprung, and all that was mortal of the unhappy man dangled at the end of the 8-foot drop. The drop, however, did not kill Benny Swim because he was cut down too soon. As was the case at the time in Canadian law, normally a body would be allowed to hang for 15 to 20 minutes, in some cases up to an hour, to ensure that the neck had been completely broken. But for some reason, Swim's body was cut down only a few minutes after his fall. When examined by the prison doctor, it was discovered that Swim's neck had not been snapped, and he still had a pulse. So, almost an hour later, while still unconscious, Swim was hanged again, this time successfully. When the news of the fate that had befallen Benny Swim had reached the community of Woodstock and the surrounding area, rumors began to swirl about what had actually happened. Some alleged that the hangman was drunk during the proceedings and that he had treated Swim disrespectfully. Apparently, the hangman, a W.A. Doyle from Montreal, had swore at Swim and pulled the trapdoor before Benny had finished praying. As well, before Swim was cut down the first time, Doyle looked at his limp body and declared, "Splendid job, ain't it? This man is as dead as a doornail." These innuendos further inflamed the anger of local residents, who became greatly wrought up over the details of the hanging and even threatened hanging the man who was brought in from Montreal. As a result of this botched execution, Benny Swim was no longer a murderer in many eyes, but the recipient of empathy. As the Woodstock newspaper, The Press, noted in its coverage of Swim's funeral, it was very largely attended. There were 150 teams in the procession. The large number of people attending testified to the disgust of the community against hanging, a relic of the Dark Ages. Now, because Swim was initially tried for the murder of Olive Trenholm, he was sentenced to death for this crime. But because of the rulings at the time, the Crown decided not to proceed with a second trial for the killing of Harvey Trenholm. Now, there was some fear that Benny Swim, before the second execution would take place, might regain consciousness, which would have added to the tragedy and the drama of his execution. His second execution was not conducted by Doyle, but was conducted by an F.G. Gill, also in Montreal, who Sheriff Foster had hired as a backup to Doyle.